Well, welcome everybody. Oh, there's no microphone. So I'll have to talk. Let me know if you can't hear me, but I bet you can. Um, this is French and Pickering Creek Conservation Trust lecture night, and we do this with Historic Yellow Springs, and they let us use this wonderful room, which means everything to us. It's great. And we're sort of focusing in the first half of this year on the 250th. We've had some wonderful historic lectures. And this tonight, even though it's trees, it's historic trees. And there are many in our area, big trees, old trees, witness trees, heritage trees, and legacy trees. So we're very happy to be adding this to our lineup. Our speaker tonight is Bob Good. And he was born and raised in nearby East Whiteland Township. He's semi-retired environmental scientist, lucky you, and professional geologist, formerly a New Jersey licensed site remediation professional and geophysicist. There's that word. Since 1989, he has worked as a consultant investigating and remediating contaminated sites under the U.S. EPA Superfund program, Pennsylvania Land Recycling Program Act 2, and New Jersey Site Remediation Reform Act. Thank you, Bob, for your work. That's a big job. Prior to that, he was an oil and gas exploration and development geophysicist in Louisiana for 5 years and a graduate research assistant geophysicist in upstate New York for 2 years. He has a bachelor's degree in physics from Franklin and Marshall and is a graduate of the Great Valley High School. Since childhood, Rob has developed multiple interests in local and American history and natural history, which continue to this day. And for that, we're happy too. Including independent study and research. He and his family enjoy hiking, camping, and visiting various historic sites, among other activities. Wherever he goes, he's always on the lookout for the big tree, old growth forests, historic sites and buildings, and indication of local geology. So join me in welcoming Bob Good.
Maybe I should have made that a little bit shorter. I don't know. I'm gonna start with thanks, Penny, for that. I want to thank Amy Langman for bringing this opportunity to my attention. This has been a hobby of mine for a long time. I've been on a little bit of sabbatical, but she's gotten me back into things. And Penny and Jim, thank you both for your help getting all the details together. I really appreciate it. I'm at a little bit of a loss because I practiced in presenter mode and now I'm going to have to read my notes. So if I look away, I'm sorry, bear with me. But as you can tell from that introduction, I'm not really a subject matter expert in terms of academic or professional experience, but I've spent a lot of time in the outdoors and I really always notice these old trees. I like them. I read about them. I seek them out. I study them. This kind of hit a new level for me when I moved back to Pennsylvania in the 1990s. I was looking for old growth forests to go hiking in, and I stumbled across a book about pen trees from the original quote unquote virgin forests, and I was hooked. My wife and I visited the Y Oak in Maryland on a vacation to the Eastern Shore. Later the same year, we visited the Sacred Oak in the Ole Valley at my mother-in-law's recommendation. And once I saw those two trees, I realized I had to get those books and try and find the rest of them. So here we are in Penn's Woods, the forests and the trees. They've always been here as long as humans have been here. Originally for the native indigenous people, for food, shelter, firewood, habitat for game. Later, when the European colonists came, well, now they're cutting down the white pines for ship masts and all the other big trees for timber, lumber, fences, charcoal for iron furnaces and forges. So it's always been with us. It's the backdrop, the landscape of our history. It's changed over time, but that's going to continue, but we still have a lot of these trees that take us all the way back. They were witnesses to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. They were witnesses to the Penn Charter and William Penn's arrival here in Pennsylvania. And chance to go stand next to or beneath one of those trees and think about all that history, I think is really pretty exciting. So I'm going to go over some general information. If you have any short questions, raise your hand, let me know. If you have more detailed questions, if you could please hold them till the end of the presentation, I'd appreciate that. I'm going to try and limit things as much as I can to Southeast Pennsylvania, Chester and Berks counties, our own backyard, so to speak. I may bring in some information from other areas. And my notes may not match up with these slides, so again, please forgive me if they don't. We're going to cover a brief background of the forest and the trees. We'll talk about big trees, what we mean, how we define big trees, old trees, and then witness, heritage, legacy trees, and we'll wrap it up with a brief, where do we go from here? So obviously what we see here is different than other regions of the country, different climates, different species, different geology. We don't have redwoods, we don't have sequoias, we don't have live oaks and cypress trees. You know, our forests and our big trees, our old trees are different. What we see now is not the way it was in colonial or pre-colonial times. There's been a lot of changes. And it's really accelerated since colonists from Europe arrived. So the current forest began developing during the late Pleistocene and Holocene epochs following the previous ice age. And you'll see those temperatures at around 12,000 years increased pretty dramatically. And over about the first 2,000 years after the last glacial event, we've reached a fairly stable warm period that we're in now. So for about the past 10,000 years, give or take. There's been some fluctuations, but we don't know if another glacial event's coming. Wait and see. And the evolution of our forests and tree species has been accelerating, like I said, over the last 3 centuries after European colonists arrived. So the last glacial maximum was 20,000 years ago, and that climate shift, like I said, happened pretty quickly from about 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. The climate started to warm, the glaciers started melting and retreating, sea level began rising. The front of the glaciers never reached this far south. It stopped several counties north of here, but it really affected the climate as follows. It was basically a modern day polar desert out in front of the glaciers when things started warming. And it gradually transitioned through tundra, spruce pine forests, and ultimately the modern mixed deciduous forest types that we know today. And I say that transition happened largely during the first 2,000 years of the warming. I don't know exactly when indigenous people came to this part of Pennsylvania. Could be as long as 6,000 or 8,000 years ago. And they saw the same forest type at that time. And the Lenape people, like I said, they were here for millennia. Fossil pollen, charcoal residues in bogs and lake sediments show for at least 2,000 to 3,000 years increases in burning, wide-scale burning, in addition to native fires. So along with natural fires, the Native Americans significantly altered the forests through intentional burning, clearing land for their agricultural pursuits, villages, managed woodlands that promoted game for hunting. And that burning kept certain areas in a lower successional phase of forest regrowth, and it created open grasslands and meadows. And they did move around. As they depleted resources in a certain area, they would move to another area, do the same thing, and let the previous areas recover. So it was a pretty sustainable and low impact that they had on the forest compared to what we do now. And like I said, they created a lot of open woodlands and meadows. It wasn't the dense, mature forest that people say a squirrel could go from here to Lake Erie without ever touching the ground. Well, first of all, it couldn't cross the Susquehanna River, but that's not true. There were a lot of openings in the forest, and some of them were created by natural disturbances. Some were created by the indigenous people. And just a few examples here: oak savannas, mostly open land with some large oak trees and other trees, or completely open grasslands and meadows. And you know about serpentine barrens, and certain carbonate rocks also create barrens with the very thin topsoils and dry conditions. I mean, the earliest people that showed up here, earliest explorers 400 years ago, so there were a lot of these open grasslands and meadows. They called them prairies, using the French term for that at the time. They said some of the forests were so clear of undergrowth and debris from frequent low intensity fires, you could drive a carriage through the forest almost unhindered. Now, later travelers found some of these same areas had regrown, probably because the indigenous people populations were decimated by disease and displacement, and those fires regrew. But they managed their forests and open spaces very carefully, very thoughtfully. Then the Europeans arrived. Earliest it was the Swedes. They were mostly interested in trading for furs with the Native Americans. They didn't really clear a lot of forest. They didn't engage in a lot of agriculture. They were here for the fur trade. Some people would say that the fur trade led the colonization of America. It was big business back in the day, you know. But then when the English, I mean, when Penn got his charter in 1681, and English settlers and later German and Scots-Irish started to show up in large numbers, that's when the clearing really accelerated. They couldn't even cut down the trees fast enough. They would girdle the trees and let them die and plant their crops and graze their cattle in between them. And they would eventually fall down, just like the ash trees are today. So that's kind of the picture when this accelerated. And you can even see vestiges of this. When they started clearing the forest, the erosion rates increased. And some of these old mill ponds have 10 feet of sediment. And if you get to the bottom of that stack of sediment, you can find the old paleosols and leaf litter from the original forest before they started clearing the land. In addition to all that, within the past century or so, we've had direct attacks on many of our favorite or most important tree species. The chestnuts, everybody knows that story. That's a tragedy. Dutch elm disease, hemlock woolly adelgid, beech bark disease. You know, the elms and the beeches, the mortality rates haven't been as high as they were for the chestnuts. But what we're seeing again now with the emerald ash borer, that's probably 100% mortality, and just every bit as tragic as what people witnessed when the chestnut blight came through. It's sad. And there's new concerns on the horizon that have yet to be seen. I mean, with this global economy, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle with invasive species. And that's what we have to live with. That's what we have to manage. So we had extensive clear cutting for agriculture, land development, urban sprawl, timber harvesting, fire suppression. Instead of having these low intensity fires every 5 or so years, we've had fire suppression. Low intensity frequent fires also helped oak trees regenerate. They're a little bit more resistant, and it thins out some of the shade tolerant trees. So, and the Native Americans knew that. They managed the forest for mast crops like oaks and chestnut. That was important for a food source and for game. Deer overpopulation is an increasing problem all the time, and that acid rain, climate change, other invasive flora, fauna, you name it. So loss of old growth pre-settlement, uneven aged forests, and that's important because natural disturbances along with human disturbances create gaps in the forest, and that increases diversity as new successional plants fill those gaps in the canopy. I've even heard that the passenger pigeon flocks were so large, they were a natural force of forest disturbance. If you've got a flock of passenger pigeons that takes days to pass over you, if you read the old accounts, and they would roost, and they would knock over trees and branches. They were a natural force for forest disturbance. But when they left a lot of fertilizer and they left a lot of sunlight. So now you have these uneven aged forests that are really healthy and diverse. So successional replacement of the old growth, it's not happening as much as it used to. It's being taken up by mixed mesophytic forests with more red maples and other shade tolerant trees, not as many oaks. And now we have these pervasive 80 to 110-year-old forests that dominate Penn's Woods. And if you think about the Hopewell Big Woods and up in French Creek State Park, that's what you see. Most of those forests are about 80. When did the state and the federal government buy that land and stop timber harvesting? That's what you have. So none of what we see is natural, but we can manage it to the best of our ability if we're thoughtful about it. I mean, maybe someday they'll replace the American chestnut. I don't know. But in the meantime, you do the best you can. So when we talk about these really old trees, two things to consider. Solitary open-grown trees. Most of these old Penn trees and big trees are grown in the open. And you can see the picture on the top right. That's a classic oak tree grown in open space. Thick bole, low branches, low heavy branches, big spreading crown, not as tall as trees in the forest canopy. That's a chinkapin oak up in the Ole Valley. That's the sacred oak in 1961 before it got crowded and diminished. But that's a classic open-grown structure of a tree. The other picture is a 300-year-old white oak in Stadium Woods. I had to go out of state to find this. That is right next to Lane Stadium on the Virginia Tech campus. Those trees are about this big around, and they go straight to the canopy, and some of them are over 300 years old. That's a closed canopy forest-grown tree. They're very different. A 300-year-old tree that's grown in a canopy could have a significantly smaller diameter than an oak tree that grew in the open, because it has to compete for nutrients and light, and they don't grow in the same manner. And then when you consider the trees, also consider the soil conditions. Are they deep, fertile, well-drained soils, or is it high up on a rocky, stony ridge with thin soils? Some trees don't do as well in saturated soils and wetlands. Those are different species. So when you measure these trees, when you estimate the ages, you have to consider also the growth habit and the growth conditions. So before we move on into the trees, now that we've covered the background, remember, not all old trees are big. Not all big trees are old on an absolute basis. Witness heritage legacy trees can be old and big, or they don't have to be. And I'll show you an example of that. Each of these categories can be exclusive of the others, but more often than not, they overlap. So we'll start with big. What's big? So Champion Trees of Pennsylvania is part of the Pennsylvania Forestry Association. You can see the link there. I encourage you to log on sometime when you get a chance. It's a wealth of information, photos, measurements. They used to put out books every couple of years with really nice glossy color photos and lists. And I'll give a shout out to a gentleman named Scott Wade. He grew up in Warwick Township near Harmonyville. He managed this program for a while, and he's the one that brought it online back in around 2010 or 2011. So these are the big tree seekers. These people are going after, they're trying to find the champion tree specific to each species, not overall. So the champion dogwood is not going to look like the champion white oak, but it's species specific. It's pretty much all volunteer work. And if they keep track of all the nominees that are large, not just the champions, but if a champion's large enough, they'll automatically nominate it for the national champion tree. This is a very empirical approach. It's not about aesthetics or beauty or history. This is finding the biggest trees, measuring them, and scoring points. But that increases our knowledge overall of big and old trees. So 1 point per inch of circumference measured at breast height, circumference CBH, circumference at breast height, 1 point per foot of height, 1 point per every 4 feet of spread. And they take the widest spread and the smallest spread and average them. And you add up all the points, and that's your score. And you win or lose championship status based on that score. There's no professional judgment involved. I'm not going to get into how they make all these measurements. They use laser rangefinders and all kinds of things. I keep a 50-foot tape measure in my car. Sometimes I take it on hikes. But this is a cool program, and it's a great resource. So look at, this is just a searchable database online. The genus is all, I should have put in Quercus, but the only alba is Quercus alba anyway. So that's a white oak. And I searched in Chester County. That's the list that comes up. not just the current champion, obviously, is up there with 367 points. But you see Springton Manor Park twice, Stroud Preserve, Brincoed Preserve. This is a good resource to find big and old trees. And they have a searchable map feature, which is even better. So you can, if you're looking in an area, every one of those red dots is a tree in their database. I clicked on Anna's Oak, Thomas P. Bentley Preserve, and this is a static view, but you could scroll up and get all the details on the left-hand side if you were live with this. This is just a snapshot. And again, I mentioned that Scott Wade, he was on the measurement crew. He's the one that shepherded this program for the last 10 years at least. He's measured and found more big trees than I ever will. He's an arborist, by the way. He worked with Longwood and some other places. So this is just a really good resource for finding big and old trees. So what do we mean by old trees? They really started to become categorized and records kept in about 1931 when these folks, Dr. Edward Embry, Director of Science Education, Philadelphia Public Schools, and a committee, they said, hey, we're celebrating the 250th year of William Penn's arrival in Pennsylvania. And they were looking for memorials to that. And he thought, let's find all the trees that were living here when William Penn arrived. That would have been 250 years old at the time. It was publicized in the Evening Bulletin. They got over 700 more nominations. Now, this includes New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Eastern Maryland. But they got 700 or more. And half of those trees, after further evaluation, made the grade. Yeah, we think it's legitimately based on your measurements and the species of tree and the growing conditions. Yeah, we think it's 250 years old. You're on the list. And they published this book. And if you're interested, I do occasionally see these available on used book sales. So if you really get the bug, you'll be going to abe.com and trying to find this book. And then the Green Valleys Association, headquartered right up here in Welkenweir, about 45 years later, embarked on a roughly 5-year program to say, let's try and find all the Penn trees that were measured and nominated 50 years ago. And they found a lot of them. Now, some were gone, many were gone due to storms, development, and other causes. Some were present during both surveys, which is a really important point for you to hang on to. And they also found some new trees that were missed before. And this book is also available at used book dealers. It's a really nice book. The first one was hard to follow because of the way they organized it in a spoke pattern. Like if you go out Route 1, there's these trees. If you go up this, it was hard to follow. This second book has some maps and it's organized by county. So it's a little easier to work with. But when we talk about old trees, we're really here talking about Penn trees. So how do you estimate the age of an old tree? I said you keep that 50-foot tape measure and you take it on hikes. You measure the circumference at breast height. This one you can see it's 12 feet 4 inches. That's one way. And then we have growth rates. We have average typical growth rates for these different tree species. And it's a simple formula. Circumference at breast height times the growth rate in inches per year of circumference, 234 years. Or you can do it by diameter. And the difference between 234 and 236 is just rounding errors. I didn't take pi out to 10 significant digits. And that's one way. That's the most common way to estimate the age of these trees. I'm going to skip over the second bullet for a minute and go to the third one. If you have measurements from multiple dates, you can plot them on a graph. You can figure out the slope of that line, of that linear trend, and get a direct growth rate from that. It's a little better than just picking a number off a piece of paper because it's specific to that tree. So consider the fact some of these trees have been measured in 1931, 1980. I found some of them and measured them in 2001. Now I've got 3 points on a line. I can get a better estimate of the growth rate. Some of these trees were boundary trees from the original land surveys. A few of them might survive. If it was a boundary tree, if it was part of your survey, you wouldn't go to your property and pull the survey pin out of the corner of your land. You wouldn't cut down the tree that marks your boundary either. So some did survive that way. And then there's dendrochronology, which around here is used more to date old buildings. They match the growth rings in the timbers of the building to standard growth rates and ring series for this region. The reason dendrochronology doesn't work real well for these old trees, most of them are rotten in the heartwood. Even if you used an increment core bore, what's the chances you're going to hit the bullseye when you bore into a 6-foot diameter tree? And the other approach is to cut the tree down and count the rings, and nobody wants to do that. And Jim's done that partway on Anna's oak. You had what, about a foot of good wood? And you counted the growth rings in that. So, and they were pretty consistent. So you can get whatever rings you can get and then project that back to the center. So that's how we measure these. This I put in here just for your information. When we said not all big trees are old trees, when you look at these trees, consider the ones highlighted in yellow have really fast growth rates. So silver maples, they get huge. They're not that old. They just have a high growth rate. You see the average and maximum ages there hovers between 140 and 200 years. Now, some with fast growth rates like tulip trees, they'll get huge and they'll get 500 years old. But for the most part, you're looking at oaks, sycamores, trees with slightly lower growth rates that have good longevity. I mean, even we don't have many yellow birch around here, but American beech, they'll get really old and they grow pretty slow. If you look at that growth rate, that's one of the slowest ones on the chart. So this just gives you an idea what species of trees to look for based on growth rate relative to size. And silver maples, they like disturbed soils and floodplains, and they grow fast. They're the weeds of the tree species pretty much. So just keep that in mind when you date these trees. So these are from the 1982 book, 10 southeastern Pennsylvania counties, basically from the Blue Ridge down to the southeastern corner. I just picked these counties in the Piedmont. Number of trees across the bottom axis, species on the left axis. The vast majority of these old pen trees are white oaks, sycamores, formerly white ash trees, which are probably mostly in decline or gone. And then a variety of other oak species, tulip trees. You see chinkapin oak about 6 or 8 down. That's that sacred oak picture. We're at the far northern range for chinkapin oaks, and they like limestone soils, so that's why it does well in Ole. So these are, if you're going to go out and look for really big old pen trees, start with the white oaks, the sycamores, and maybe a few other species. Worth noting also, about 25% of all these trees will exceed the average longevity by quite a bit. So it's a bell curve. There's always a few out on the end of that bell curve that can be much older than the average. It's not an exact science. It requires professional judgment. This is how you would do it graphically. If you remember from high school algebra, y equals mx plus b is the formula for a line on a graph. So the y-axis on the left side is the circumference of the tree in inches. The x-axis on the bottom is the date in years. The red dots are the measurements. And then we put a linear trend line on those measurements and extend it back to the date that it would have sprouted, assuming it had a continuous average growth rate. Now, in the real world, probably not. You have droughts, dry spells, other disturbances, competition from other trees. But generally, this holds up pretty well. And you see, 0.61, 0.63, 0.67. What did I use in the previous slide? 0.63. So now the one on the lower right, London Grove Friends Meeting oak, that had a much higher growth rate. It was not as old as people thought it was when it fell. And when it fell, it was surprisingly intact all the way through the trunk. And a local timber harvester took that and slabbed it up, and they used the wood for different purposes, some memorial and historical. But I asked him if anybody counted the rings, and he said, no, but we carbon dated it. They carbon dated the heartwood, and they got a number from an age of, was sprouted somewhere between 1650 and 1690. But if you look at that graph, it was about 1660. So we're in the ballpark. And that tree was growing there when they founded that Friends meeting in 1714. So One of the oldest trees around, the sacred oak in the upper left, that goes back to before 1600. So it's legitimately 1, 2, 3, it's legitimately 400 or more years old. The king oak at Springton Manor in the upper right, you can see that anytime you want to go out and take a walk at that park. It's beautiful. And there's another pen tree right next to it. And then I didn't have any slides on the Wernersville oak, but that one's up in Berks County at the Wernersville State Hospital. It's also about 400 years or so old. Sadly, most of the pen trees are vanishing due to old age, senescence, weather, pests, rot. The upper left is the Pusey oak that was damaged in a windstorm. There wasn't much left to save. In the upper right corner, that was a black oak near the Grove Methodist Church in West Whiteland. PennDOT cut it down because it was a danger to the nearby roads and intersections. But in all fairness to PennDOT, if you look closely at that tree, there's a lot of rot in the heartwood. It could have gone at any time. And that is my research assistant in that picture. Lower left is that oak at London Grove Friends meeting. That was the Pennsylvania champion for about 50 years. Almost no rot in the trunk, but there was rot right at the ground level. And it just fell over, I think in calm weather. At some point, they can just no longer support their own weight. Likewise, Anna's oak. Jim, that was no big storm when that fell over, right? It was one day you went to bed and the next day you got up and it was gone. So, but you see, there's a lot of rot in the center of that tree. They just collapse under their own weight when they get old enough. And there's no way you can prevent that. I mean, fungus and insects, when they lose a branch and that doesn't heal over, you get a rain pocket and that lets rot enter the heartwood of the tree. Unless you care for these really, really carefully all the time with an arborist, it's inevitable that eventually they're going to rot and fall. So let's get into this kind of confusing category of witness heritage and legacy trees. I think a witness tree, most important way to think of that is it was a silent witness to very significant historical events. It was growing there when that event happened. You find these all over the place in Revolutionary and Civil War battlefields. That if you search for witness trees in Pennsylvania, you're probably going to get a picture of that tree on the right, the Sickles oak at Gettysburg. It's a swamp white oak. It's almost 250 years old now, but it was witness to some serious Civil War combat action. And Gettysburg is full of witness trees, and so are the other Civil War battlefields and our Revolutionary War locations as well. It can mean other things, but consider that a witness to a really significant historical event. Heritage trees, the same, but they go beyond that a little bit. Exceptional size, rarity, beauty, in addition to those strong connections with history. And then legacy trees, again, large, old, culturally significant, but that also has, legacy trees are also important in terms of forestry. They're those old trees that survive when every other one was cut down or knocked down. They're important to regenerating forests, to biological diversity. I mean, even when these trees are dying, dead, and in decay, they help promote diversity in nature. So that's, these are fairly interchangeable, but there's very subtle differences. But you wouldn't be wrong if you used any one of these terms interchangeably in most cases. Here's a little bit more about witness trees. I included this because I like the witness tree protection program. We don't hide these trees in this protection program. It was established by National Park Service Historic American Landscape Survey, originally just in the DC area, like the cherry trees around the tidal pond and some other old trees, but now it's been expanded to cover the entire country. Just two examples, the magnolia trees in front of the White House that were planted by Andrew Jackson. The one on the left was taken down in 2025 due to, it was a hazard tree at that point. Arborists evaluated it and it had to go. Somebody was going to get hurt if they were at the wrong place at the right time. But it was replanted with the same stock. The other one is from the Oklahoma City bombing at the Murrah building. That tree was filled with metal and glass from the explosion. They were going to cut it down as part of the investigation and rehabilitation, and enough people protested and they left it as a witness tree to that tragic event. Just a couple examples of different witness trees outside the battlefield. Heritage trees, again, the cultural connections, but also size, very old and usually large, rare. Sometimes these get a little extra care and protection. Sometimes local ordinances will try to protect and preserve these trees, or they'll get care from an arborist. They keep people away from the base of the tree so they don't trample and compact the soil over the roots, that sort of thing. Legacy trees, I think of these more as the bottom category: memorials, living tributes to deceased individuals. They plant a tree in their memory. That's certainly becoming more common. Also in forestry and ecology, these things are really important. And I wish I could find my notes on that one. If you'll bear with me a second. There's a book I've recommended to some people, Ethan Tapper, How to Love a Forest. He's a forester in Vermont, so it's a little bit different than our area, but he talks about forest disturbances and management, and he talks about these legacy trees. He calls them wolf trees. They're like the old lone wolf that is still out there when the rest of the forest was cut down for pasture and farms, and how important they are to diversity, to leave those old trees on the landscape. And the Forest Service defines them as old trees that have been spared during harvest, survived stand replacing natural disturbances. They've achieved near maximum size and age, significantly larger and older than the average trees on the landscape. And they're really, really valuable to the ecology and forest regeneration. So that's how I differentiate legacy trees from regular witness and heritage trees. So let's get into the fun part. Let's look at some pictures. This is a local forest legacy tree. I don't know how many, by show of hands, how many folks hike up at Monocacy Hill? Okay, got a couple folks. Well, you don't count because you go with me. So I've always noticed this tree on our hikes. And if you see on the lower left photo, behind that oak tree, that's the one that was in the dating. How do you measure and date a tree? It's the same white oak, about 230, 40 years old. There's a low stone wall behind it. So this was a field, or the boundary of a field or a property at one time. And if you look at the photo from 1937 on the right, you see between the two arrows, there's a line of larger trees. You can see in the texture of the canopy, there's a line of bigger trees along that area. And then below that, you can see the western boundary and the southern boundary, and then a road out to the east. And at one time, that was a cleared field, and it's in succession. So those successional trees are the small ones you see in the photograph surrounding that big one that was left over from that field boundary. And I just put a LiDAR picture there in the middle because if you squint really closely at that LiDAR picture, that's light detection and ranging. They basically use lasers, and they reflect that down off the. It's more complicated than that, but they can get a good view of the topography by using LiDAR. And you can see traces, you can see the creek beds clearly, and you can see traces of those old stone walls on the north, east, and south sides of that field. Anytime you're out in the woods and you see interesting topographic features like stone walls, quarry pits, old roads, the old Schuylkill Canal shows up clear as a bell on LiDAR. So it's just a good tool when you're out in the woods and you see interesting things, you can cross-reference it with the LiDAR. So this is a legacy tree. It's an old tree that was spared when that area was cleared for fields, and it's been there the whole time during the regrowth of that forest. It's unique ecological value. The star of our show, Anna's Oak. It's a witness tree, it's a heritage tree, it's a legacy tree. It's old. It's estimated to be anywhere from 350 to 400 years old, surprisingly absent from both Penn tree surveys. I don't know how they missed this. It's in the middle of an open field. And it pretty well, it's rural, but it's not, it's not the Sahara Desert, And it was briefly the state champion after that tree at the London Grove Friends meeting fell down. Anna's Oak was very briefly the Pennsylvania state champion white oak until it too fell. But it's also a legacy tree because you're regrowing seedlings at that location from the same acorns. You're honoring the legacy of that place and that tree. And it's certainly witnessed enough history with the ironworks and the Revolutionary War cannons and other munitions that were cast at Warwick Furnace. So this is a classic example. When you say witness, heritage, legacy tree, well, they're interchangeable sometimes. It's really all three for a tree like this. These are some former trees I just want you to be aware of. The Dilworth Town Oak. That was one of the most well-known and famous witness trees in Chester County until it fell in the 80s. I'm guessing, I don't know the date of that photo, but people don't dress like that anymore, and they're all women. So I'm figuring, mid to early 20th century, perhaps. Maybe it's the Daughters of the American Revolution, for all I know. This tree was in the heart of the Brandywine battlefield. Legend has it that the British commander hung American spies from those branches, or that he hung his own troops for atrocities. And he didn't want the populace to be against the British crown in this battle. So I don't know which is true. I don't know if it's ever been decided. A lot of these old trees also have old legends. So that was 1777. This witnessed the Battle of the Brandywine. The old Washington oak, this was King of Prussia, right on Gulf Road in a little narrow grassy land strip between a busy Wawa and Gulf Road in downtown King of Prussia. And it survived up until the 80s as well. This witnessed Washington and his troops retreating from Germantown on their way to Valley Forge. And it held on for a long time until they figured it was becoming a hazard tree at that location. People were memorializing these old trees before the Penn survey. So this one is a centennial white oak up near Kutztown. That's a 1908 postcard. And that was probably the largest white oak in Pennsylvania at the time, although there wasn't a lot of data to compare it to. That was featured in an 1876 book about the history of Kutztown and Manatawny. So at least that far back, people were noticing and documenting these old trees. And I have a book here. You're welcome to page through it later, but 1901 to 1917 was sort of the golden age of postcards. And a lot of these old witness trees are included in old postcards. The Richards Oak down on Route 1 near the Mason-Dixon line, that was another. I mean, everywhere Lafayette stopped, they put up a plaque or named something after. So, but, and then here on the right, we've talked about the London Grove Friends meeting. That's that white oak that was the state champion for over 50 years. It was a gorgeous tree. Just had to stand by that trunk and there's no feeling. You can't tell when you look at a picture like this what it feels to stand under or right next to a tree of that magnitude. It was gorgeous, drop dead, photogenic, beautiful tree. And then one day it just fell over. And we saw that. That was just barely a Penn tree. It's a baby. Two sycamores in the mix here. The Pauling sycamore is in Valley Forge National Park. It's on the north side of the Schuylkill River, away from the main encampment. That might be why it survived, because those guys were looking for firewood all winter. It's beautiful. You can see the little orange dot back by the tree trunk is the hat of my research crew. Those branches, they come out, they dip down, they hit the ground, they come back up. It's enormous. Again, not really tall, but thick trunk, thick branches. These trees just keep putting on mass. They don't slow down in their growth. They just get thicker.
So when George Washington,
that's a Revolutionary War heritage tree or witness tree, we believe, based on the size and the estimated age. Yeah.
How old do you think it is?
I'm still not in presenter mode, so give me a second to find my notes.
It could be added up.
No, I have it here. I mean, Pauling sycamore. Well, there was another Lafayette sycamore in Valley Forge too until it fell in 2011. I'm saying this is about 285 to 325 for the Pauling sycamore, based just on circumference measurements. And the Lafayette sycamore that survives, unlike the one in Valley Forge that did not, that's down at the Battle of the Brandywine Park. It's Pennsylvania Museum and Historical Commission Park down on Route 1. So these are all trees you can visit. And I encourage you to do so. I mean, obviously the Centennial White Oak and the London Friend, the previous ones were gone, but these are trees you can visit. The King Oak, and behind it, the Queen Oak, they're at Springton Manor Park in Chester County. Really nice park if you've never been there. They've got an old barn, old farm, animals. It's really kid friendly too for families. You can park and walk right down to either of these trees. The Queen Oak in the back, you can see a lot of its branches dip down and come back up off the ground. The King Oak has a little different form, but they're pretty healthy last time we were there, and they're very accessible. That was one of the 8 Penn manors that were set aside for William Penn's family so that's why Springton Manor. And his wife's last name was Springett, so Springton. So that's one of the original Penn manors of Chester County. And then my favorite, I have to confess, the Sacred Oak of the Ole Valley. That's a 1961 picture, courtesy of the Reading Eagle. You can see the gentleman in front to give it some scale. Gorgeous tree. They call it the Sacred Oak because it's rumored that the native people thought the Great Spirit lived in this tree and they went there to worship. There's no way to confirm that. Those legends didn't show up until the 1920s, and they've been repeated as fact ever since. It's between Old State Road. The Rife Farm is on Old State Road, and then they bypassed it, the one that goes straight into the village of Ole from the west. So if you trust me, it's all over Facebook and the internet. And I will tell you, this one, the Sacred Oak, is on private property, and they now allow visitation, typically only 1, maybe 2 days a year. It has not been posted for 2026. It's usually the first Saturday in June from 9 a.m. till early afternoon. So if you really want to see it, and I don't think they let you get right up to the base anymore because they don't want soil compaction. It's bad for the tree. And a lot of these branches have been pruned back or lost. This one's a little bit sad because I don't know if you can tell in that picture, there were some saplings growing up around it. And they weren't really controlled. So as those trees grew up around it, some of the lower branches were starved for light and died back. So it's still massive at the base. It's still impressive, but it's a shadow of its former self. It's received better care lately. So if you look that up online, you'll find it's probably go to the big tree link that I showed you and go to Berks County and you can find it. It's a chinkapin oak. And I don't know if it's the champion anymore after the pruning, but and I'll give you my email at the end of the presentation. If you need more information, I'll share it. White oak on St. Peter's Road, just up near Coventry Woods in North Coventry Township. I don't know if this witnessed anything other than farming and settlement. Obviously, it predates the barn because it's old. It's like 350 to 400 years old. And when they built the barn, they didn't disturb the tree. What's that tell you about preservation of these trees? It's on private property, but it's now, I put that on there as an example. Recently, within the past few years, it was placed under conservation easement by Natural Lands Trust. So this is my shout out to land trusts. You can help protect these trees too, like you did with Anna's Oak. So it's Great Oak Farm, they call it, on the Natural Lands Trust website, and it's very easily visible from the road. The final one, I took a picture right out of the book because I didn't like all the power lines I was getting in my other photos. So that's the Strode Oak back in 1980 or so. It saw the British troops pass by on their way to the Brandywine battlefield. And right up at the corner is the old Strode Mill, which is one of the earliest mills in Chester County. And they were also one of the earliest vendors at the Philadelphia markets. They used to make their own scrapple in a little building next door. And I remember having Strode scrapple when I was a kid. So that's a sentimental pick. So that's the show and tell part. So where do we go from here? That tree on the right, that's the Wernersville State Hospital oak. And that is my research team also. So what's it take for a tree to even get that old? Well, really good luck, avoiding storm damage and other weather issues. pests, disease, being in a safe place away from development, human indifference, inertia, benign neglect, or tolerance. Maybe it was just not desirable as a source of timber or firewood, just too difficult to cut down and cut up. Was not in the way, too expensive to remove. But I'm hopeful that a lot of these will survive due to deliberate preservation for aesthetic, sentimental, or historical values. I heard that the earliest settlers planted these trees on the southern or southwestern sides of their houses to provide shade as the tree grew. They didn't have fans or air conditioning. I mean, people still needed shade on a hot day. They left some trees in their pastures around their farmsteads for shade. And sometimes for they used to let their livestock run loose before people fenced everything in. I mean, pigs and other animals would feed on the acorns. And I forgot to put one other point. If it was a boundary tree, they weren't going to be in a hurry to cut that down either. So where do we go? We need to start thinking about the next generation of old trees because the original pen trees are fading fast. So seems to me, in keeping with the topic of your lectures, maybe trees that are 250 years old now. We're not going to call them semi-quincentennial because nobody can pronounce or spell that. But maybe they're independence trees. Maybe they're Revolutionary War trees. They're out there. You have tools to find them. I mean, and what are we talking about when we look for these trees? If it's a white oak, 13 feet in circumference or larger, 16 or more feet in circumference for black oaks, and maybe 18 or 19 feet in circumference or more for sycamores and some other faster growing species. And trust me, they're out there. You just have to find them. And at this point, it could probably include some non-native species because by 1776, people like John Bartram and other arborists and all were importing species and growing them here in America. So you could open the door to other species than just natives. Where do you find them? Well, same places we always find them. Institutional properties, churches, graveyards, meeting houses. How many of these were in churchyards and next to, I mean, a lot of them were. But in addition to that, now we have nonprofit land preserves and arboretums, state and federal parks and forests, privately owned farms that are under conservation easements, and sometimes other properties where people just decided it's too nice of a tree, too beautiful, too special to cut down. So that concludes the presentation for tonight. I hope you learned a few new things. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're going to get your tape measure and go out in the woods.
And a crew.
What's that?
And a crew.
And you need a research team. Shelby's going to distribute these references. You can either go back and review the slideshow and pause it on these slides, or she'll make something available in the follow-up email. These are just selected references and links that you can use if you want to read more or learn more.
The slide a few back that showed what to look for if you're looking for the independence trees. Yes.
You didn't find a typo, did you?
13 feet for white oaks. I think that's a nice thing to have in your pocket.
Again, that's just a rough estimate.
Yeah, well, that's all right.
Yeah. I thought you found another typo. I've been fixing this all week.
Yeah.
But yeah, these all will be available. I mean, there's general forestry, there's the big and old trees. There's one about the wolf trees. Oh, dendrochronology. That book, Tree Story, is pretty cool if you want to learn more about dendrochronology. And then on Facebook, if you just want to look at cool pictures of big and old trees, those are good links. I mean, some of the oak trees in Ohio are just magnificent, and New York as well. So this is on the Kaufman farm in Ole, across from Catherine Kaufman's house, which has one of your cannons in the front yard. Pardon?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I'm opening it up to questions.
Okay, I don't have, well, I do have a question and a statement.
Yeah.
So my question is, how far and wide do you go to find these big trees?
As far as you like.
I was interested in finding them in other townships and municipalities that are not in this area?
Oh, you can, yeah. I mean, the original survey was New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, Eastern Shore, Maryland, and in other states. I mean, it's a very informal, but as you saw from the references, there's big trees of Ohio, big trees of New York. There was a book for heritage and big trees in New Jersey, anywhere you like.
The reason I asked is because many, many years ago, up in Bucks County, sort of, I don't know, towards New Hope, but further north,
Was it the Columbus oak?
there's a catalpa
Oh,
that's like over 400 years old. I've never seen such a big catalpa ever. And word has it that it was used as, ceremonial grounds for whichever Native Americans were up there at the time. And it was right next to a house that the person who owns the house makes djembe drums. So we would have djembe circles and you could buy these homemade drums. And he was telling all these stories about how the grounds were so sacred with this catalpa. But I was just shocked because I went to school for horticulture and landscape design, and I know catalpas, and this just spread out. It just was unbelievable.
they'll get big. The key is, what's the growth rate?
Yeah.
I mean, because some of the legends have basis in fact, and some are just wishful thinking. So you really have to be careful whether or not you're going to accept a legend at face value. But if you knew more about the size of that tree and the growth rate of catalpas, I don't happen to have that in my database.
Yeah.
But there's a pretty big one at the Berks Heritage Center too.
Okay.
But I recall they also grow rather fast. So measure it, see what you can find about the growth rate. Yes.
Is if any of the local people visited Charlestown Nature Center, there was a big tree there. I remember I brought a bunch of kids there and they took like 10 kids to wrap around the tree. So I guess it was a maple because they're not mentioning it as a significant tree.
Well, these surveys missed a lot of trees. Like this one in the picture right now is not in either survey. I'm still going to contact the property owner to get a closer look at this. I did about 20 years ago when Catherine Kaufman lived there, but it's under new ownership. But these trees get missed. So if you can identify the species and then take a measurement and try and match that with the growth rate, it'll give you a much better idea what ballpark you're in. Yes.
Save the seeds from these old trees, and how would you prepare the area where the tree once grew to plant a seedling?
I am not qualified to answer that, honestly. Like I said, I'm not an arborist or a botanist or a forester, so I really don't know. I'm sorry to say that.
She has Polly's.
What kind?
Oh,
She has Polly's.
I'm trying.
Oh, from-
Pulling farm sycamore.
Well, I don't know, but you can go back there and get them anytime you want.
Big, got the water on and.
Oh.
I lost it.
Yeah, well, don't give up or go get a new fresh batch.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
If you had a tree to plant for people to enjoy 250 years from now, what would you plant?
White oak.
Right.
A white oak.
Right up.
Yeah. I mean, that just happens to be my favorite. And they are very long lived with proper care. They're just, in my mind, other than like, I haven't seen the sequoias or the redwoods yet, but for this part of the country, I think they're probably about the most majestic tree, other than perhaps some of the white pines and hemlocks we get upstate or out at Cook State Forest. That's some real old growth out there too. Yes, sir.
For a cool tree, what circumference would you say would make it maybe a smart? You a very big.
They do grow fast, but they grow old. Amy, when you showed me the tree at Crow's Nest, remember you pointed that out to me and I measured it, and it's big, but it's not that old because of the fast growth rate. But they will. Have you ever been down in the lower southern Appalachians, Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. Look up the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. They have poplar, tulip trees, yellow poplars, they call them also. They are huge. And the way you can tell when they get really, really old is the furrows out of the bark start to disappear in the lower part of the tree. They get smooth. But I would look for something at least 6 or 7 feet in diameter. But put a tape around it at 4.5 feet above the ground. Email me if you need a growth rate for tulip trees, and you can estimate that tree yourself.
What about sycamores?
They have a fast growth rate, but they get huge. They are, yeah. Well, and rumor has it that sometimes Native Americans planted them near springs so you could see the white bark when the leaves were down and always locate. I don't know if that's true. And I've heard in the Ohio Valley, when they first explored the Ohio Valley out in Ohio, that some of those hollow sycamore trees, they lived in them for a while till they could build their own shelter.
Huh.
Some of them were 20 and 30 feet in diameter. But typically hollow, all the living part of the tree was in the cambium and the outer portions. There's one up in Blandon that I could stand inside of it, and it's completely hollow. The top's blown off of it, but it's keeps on going. That's a pen tree also. Yeah. There's a postcard of it in the book. So, yes, ma'am.
Beach size group, because I have a very large beach in my woods that I'm treating.
Is it American beech?
Mhm.
That is a really slow growth rate. So if it's like more than this big around, it's worth measuring. And again, I didn't bring a whole list of the growth rates per species. And not every, like to the question about the catalpa tree, not every species has an established growth rate because there just hasn't been enough old trees or measurements to compile one. But American beech, they grow very slowly. So, oh yeah, if you go back to that slide, take that number and take some measurements and play around with it and see what you get. I was telling Jim, my wife and I were hiking at Bryn Coed the other day, and we saw an American beech back in those woods that there's back on where the yellow and the red trail come together.
Yep.
I'm going back there with my tape measure. They're very slow growing. There was one down at Susquehannock State Park that we measured once. It was also quite old. Well, thank you, everyone.
That's great. Thank you all for coming. This was just wonderful. We've got our homework ready to go. And also, don't forget, it's going to be on the website. So if you want to go back and check any of these slides and get the information, it'll be there probably within tomorrow. Oh, Shelby, you're something. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming. Good.